So these are some of the cultural controls. You know, really, pest management begins with good cultural controls. Doesn't matter if you're using chemicals, synthetic chemicals, organic chemicals, you need to use good cultural controls. And these are some of them that I consider to be some of your best options. Now, not all of these are practical for blueberries, but one is practice clean sanitation, clean harvest. You know, if you leave a lot of the damaged berries on the ground, the damaged berries are infested, you're going to have flies come out of those berries, you're going to be increasing your problem. I understand how difficult it is cleaning up all the fallen berries with blueberries, but that is one of the techniques, and we have some people that do have the resources to practice clean sanitation in blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and strawberries. But and the other thing is, if you are going to practice sanitation, what you need to do with the fruit is you need to bag it and bury it. Bag it and leave it in the sun. Research at Michigan State has shown that if you bury it even up to 1 meter in the ground, that the larvae are able to crawl up being, 3 feet down in the soil and emerge. And so what they recommend is storing the fruit into a clear plastic bag, tying it up, and just leaving it in the sun. And that's going to heat it and kill them that way. So that's the best way of disposing it, or putting it into trash or whatever. But don't leave those near the planting or even bury them. Harvest and refrigerate immediately. Again, it's going to arrest the development. Post-harvest cleanup. So that was the last thing there. We were talking about geese. That may be a good possibility. Cultural controls. Consider early ripening varieties. What we saw in 2013 and 2014 is the early and mid-season blueberries really were mostly done with picking before we had problems with spotted wing Drosophila. So if you are replanting, if you're putting in new plantings, I would encourage people to consider some of those earlier maturing ones. I'd also like people to group some of their blueberries by maturity, so they could potentially spray, some early season ones without having to spray the others, and so you can adjust how you spray them. If they're just random in a row, you really don't have any control over which ones you spray at a particular time. Prune the plants to provide an open canopy. The females like dark places to spend the day. If your canopy is a little more open, a little more sunlight coming in there, that's not going to be as preferred a place for them to sit during the day. The other thing is, with a more open canopy, when you do spray, you're going to get better coverage, you're going to get better penetration of your materials into that canopy, so that's very important. Reduce wild hosts if practical. If going out to your blueberry planting, you drive down a road with a lot of mulberries, that might be an issue. Those mulberries are going to come on pretty early, and they're going to be another host that those spotted wing Drosophila could potentially build up on prior to the blueberry harvest. So what are growers doing around the country? Some growers that are having to meet this zero tolerance, what they're doing is that as soon as the fruit on their crops begin to turn color, they begin spraying. They're so adverse to anyone ever finding that first larva in a load that they spray preventively. And it's based on the phenology. When the crop is blooming, you don't spray it. When the berries are green, you don't need to spray them. But as soon as those green berries begin turning color, they're becoming susceptible and they're becoming attractive to the spotted wings. So that's when they would begin those sprays. Others, in some other places, particularly people that are selling at farmers markets and don't have to abide by the zero tolerance, are using traps, and they're using the traps successfully. And they've had good luck with that. How they use the traps, as soon as they find the first spotted wing Drosophila, they go on a spray program until they're done harvesting that crop. So that's how they use the traps. Either way, what I recommend is that you use the flotation method at least once a week. When you're picking, take a sample of 30 berries or so, put it in a plastic bag, and I'll show you how to do the flotation test here. So it can be used to check for both the eggs and the larvae, although my eyes are not good enough to check for the eggs. I check for the larvae. You make a flotation solution by mixing a half cup of sugar in 1 quart of water. You can do it with salt as well, but I sort of like the sugar because I can pour that on the ground when I'm done. I don't worry about the salt on the ground. You place the bags in a Ziploc plastic bag, you mash them up, you pour in some of that solution, you stir it up, and you look to see if you can get these larvae floating to the surface. If you see no larvae, you know that what you're doing is working pretty well. Either they're not there or your management is working. You start to see a situation like this where you have these rice-sized larvae floating to the surface. Whatever you're doing is failing. Take that to your co-op. That can cause an entire load of blueberries to be rejected at your co-op. So this is how we monitor what we're doing. Generally, commercial growers, when they start to see larvae in the flotation, they have to throw away their harvest for the next week and really step up their spray program to really clean out a cycle of the larvae in the fruit. So it can be a very expensive process, but it's cheaper than having loads rejected. I have some other pest management guidelines here. Monitoring the plantings as well as the surrounding areas. They found actually higher numbers in surrounding areas than they have in blueberry plantings in Wisconsin. Reducing alternate hosts. We talked a little bit about the trapping there. Next to the bottom, one thing I want to emphasize is rotate your chemistries, the mode of action of the materials if you spray for spotted wing Drosophila. Spotted wing Drosophila as a group has been the geneticist's white rat since the 60s. We know an awful lot about the genome of the Drosophila. And what we have found out in terms of insecticide resistance, it only takes one base pair mutation or change for it to develop resistance to most insecticides. Consider that I don't know how many base pairs they have in a Drosophila, say 100,000. We're going to have millions in us, but if you get potentially the right change in one of those, it's going to be a resistant individual, and that's going to lead to more resistant individuals. And so my point being, it doesn't take much to develop resistance with this insect, and the only way we stop it is by trying to prevent it. By switching modes of action, rotate your sprays with insecticides with different modes of action, that helps to prevent it. Doesn't matter if we're talking about conventional insecticides or organic insecticides. What do we have in terms of organic sprays? We have a couple of good organic sprays for spotted wing Drosophila. Now the two I have that are for organic producers are in the red boxes down there at the bottom. The first is Entrust. Entrust is in that effective category and gives 3 to 5 days worth of control. So, this comes from a national recommendation. I would say in our area we've had very good success at 5 days worth of control with the Entrust. One thing you have to watch out with Entrust though is that you're limited in the number of sprays you can put on for the entire year. So it's generally in the order of about 3 sprays depending upon the rate you're using. So what I would recommend, if you're in a situation where you need to spray your organic blueberries, go in with Entrust. It's going to be the best organic spray you have. You might spray it on a Saturday night, come back in on Thursday night, and come in with a second material. You come in with Pyganic. Pyganic's not as good. It's only going to give you a day or two control, but it's going to be a different mode of action. It's killing the spotted wing Drosophila in a different way, and it's going to get you through to the next Saturday night. Next Saturday night comes, you go back to Entrust. You spray that. Following Thursday again, come back with Pyganic. You go back to Entrust a third time. Keep in mind that the risk to blueberries is If these were organic raspberries grown in the fall, I'd say it probably is a showstopper. But blueberries are a lower risk. Even if you don't spray, you're going to have lower levels of infestation than you would with blackberries or raspberries. What we've seen in some years, they show up so late that it's only the very tail end of the season that you get them. I'm hoping that you don't have to spray your early varieties, maybe even not your mid-season, but towards the tail end of the season, just like what we saw with those graphs earlier, that's when your risk comes up. That's when you really need to be more diligent with spotted wing Drosophila management. The other thing you need to keep in mind are the pre-harvest intervals. So for blueberries, the Entrust has a 3-day pre-harvest interval. You're spraying during harvest. Just because it's organic doesn't mean it's safe to pick the next day. You have to wait 3 days after you spray it. You finish spraying, wait 3 days, then you can pick it. Pyganic has some control, and it's a 0-day pre-harvest interval on Pyganic. So as soon as the spray is dry, you can go in and begin picking with the Pyganic. And so basically, if you use the Entrust, there's only 3 days during the week that you cannot pick. So if we sprayed Saturday night, you wouldn't pick Sunday, you wouldn't pick Monday, and you wouldn't pick Tuesday. A couple of things. One, with evening spraying, particularly late in the afternoon, at least after 3 o'clock, preferably after 6 o'clock, you're not going to affect any pollinators that might be out there, because Entrust can have some impact on honeybees and other things. And you're also going to get it working that entire night before the sun comes out. The sun is one of the things that breaks down things really quick. If you ever left plastic out in the sun, you see how powerful the sun is in terms of breaking these things down. And so you want to get the full effect of that Entrust for the 12 hours before the sun starts to degrade those residues. So getting coverage. If you are going to spray, you need to get good coverage with your sprays. And so I really recommend getting some sort of mist blower, something like that, where you can really penetrate into the canopy. But coverage is the key. You want to kill those adults before they have a chance to lay those eggs. That's the target. So high pressure sprays, a motorized backpack mist blower is going to run you $700 to $800. Where things have failed in Michigan, there were some characteristics they noted. One was waiting too long between sprays. So, you don't want to push Entrust past 5 days. You don't want to rely on Pyganic past 2 days. So that's what you have. Where you have fields near wooded borders, well, that describes every agricultural field in Kentucky, if you ask me. We have a lot of woods here. Dense canopies. So you want to prune your canopies so you get good light penetration and good spray penetration. Water volume too low. You want to keep your water volume up so you get thorough coverage of your plants. Not reapplying after a rain. And what I think about with that is, particularly if we've had on the order of 1 to 2 inches of rain, you may have to go back and reapply some of these materials. Using rates that are too low. Don't go below the labeled rate. Follow the label, use the labeled rate. And I know how it works in Kentucky. You can have a plan, but we get these popcorn-like thunderstorms that materialize out of nowhere and hit you. Strictly following the label, they would say, there's going to be, most of these pesticide labels will have a minimum retreatment interval. And so that is the way to do that. We do have some fact sheets